Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our podcast. I have here my co-host Steve, and then myself, James, and our third co-host is still
a new father, so he is MIA for the next X amount of sections. We don't know when he's coming back, but he will return.
Exactly. But yeah, last week we talked about a lot about the news and what's going on in the world, and today we wanted to chat a little bit more about helping individuals when they do have interviews and some common questions and both of our thoughts about, both being the interviewer and the interviewee on both sides of the coin and how we would answer certain questions that are very common in an interview.
Yep. I know we touched upon this probably on the myths episode where we talked about a lot of the myths and what are myths, what are not, and we just thought we'd dive into it. So
so let's get into it. So the first question is, tell me about yourself. So Steve, what do you think how people should be answering this question from your perspective?
From my perspective, what a recruiter is looking for, especially if you're trying to make a lasting impression to whoever you're interviewing with, is a well-structured life story, in my opinion. A well-structured life story covering the beginning of kind of your career. Well, it depends on your timeline horizon of how many years you've worked. If you've worked for 20 years, the beginning is not going to matter as much. So you keep that a little short, and then you move into like the more recent roles, and of course diving in more details in the most recent position. That's how I usually expect people to structure it, and that's what I'm usually looking for. And someone that just understands explaining enough detail to make the interviewer happy or comfortable with kind of how they fit with the job description, if that makes sense. So when you're explaining your life story or tell me about yourself, you're kind of always relating back to the skills that they're looking for.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I know James has interviews where it's designated.
Yeah.
You have an hour session, I believe, right?
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned the word life story, because I work at Shopify, and that's one of the most iconic interviews that we have that every single employee has to go through, where it's an entire interview just telling us about your life and the story about it. And I want to emphasize the word story, because I think storytelling is actually one of the most important skills when it comes to interviewing. If you aren't able to tell your story very efficiently and effectively to the interviewer, then it's going to be very tough for you to sell your skill sets, sell your experience to that individual if you're not able to tell a story. And like you said, what's a good story have? Structure. It has a beginning, middle, end. It doesn't drag on. It's not too long. It's not too short. You're describing the experiences that are the most impactful, not only to you, but trying to align it with the job description and the company itself. I think it's super, super important. At the end of the day, you have to know who you are and what your story is, and you have to be able to convey all of that in that question, or if there's an entire interview, you should definitely be able to do that during that time.
Do you think it's appropriate to sprinkle a little bit about your personality, like your personal life, into this type of question, James?
Absolutely. I think that's what differentiates a lot of people is when they are able to align the more personal kind of life and personality into the interview, because it is tell me about yourself, not tell me about your career. Like, that's more so on the resume. You obviously want to go through it, but you also want to tell the more personal side of it, because if I just wanted to know only about your career and job tasks and responsibilities, I'd look at your resume. But I want to know, how did that job make you feel? What were the biggest challenges? What were the things that you're most proud of that you went through, during those times? I wanted to get that emotional, personal side of those things alongside of the actual technical aspects of your career history.
Oh, 100%. I definitely agree. The ones that stick out, in my opinion, in terms of these interviews, or answers to those questions, is the ones that sprinkle a little bit about themselves, and that differentiates someone that's just kind of robotic versus a human. And at the end of the day, that question is an opportunity for you to just show the human side of yourself, right? Like
Exactly.
in addition to the experiences, but I think it's a great idea to include both.
Yep. No, for sure. All right. So that's the first question. So the second question is, tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. And this is a very common question, and it's one of those questions that is like it never dies. Like this question has been used for like every interview from the dawn of time when people started interviewing people. So like, what are your thoughts on this, Steve?
I mean, it's a commonly used question. Like, always be prepared for this, regardless of like
Always.
what type of interview you're going through, whether it's a technical round or like the first round. I would say 80% chance it's gonna be asked.
Yeah, exactly.
And like this, it comes with practice. I think for this type of question, you need to have a rough idea, or what the interviewer is looking for is usually self-awareness. That I think is the biggest thing. It's like, can this person be aware of themselves? Like, is this, unless you're perfect, which in my opinion, no one really is,
Nobody.
right? There's always a weakness. There's always strengths that some people play by. And you can tell when someone has a polished response, or they know themselves, and you know, if you're going to say something, make sure to give an example. I think that helps kind of reinforce the strength. Because if you just say, yeah, I'm a good communicator, I'm a hardworking individual, I move fast, like that doesn't really tell me much. But giving an example with those and going into more detail definitely instills confidence that you are those characteristics, right?
Yeah.
And then with the weaknesses, I think the harder question is the weaknesses. What do you think?
So I agree with you when it comes to specifics and examples, and I think it ties into what I feel about this question is about authenticity. You know, making sure that you're super authentic about, you know, what you are good at and what you might not be the best at. And I tend to not like the word weakness because it does have a negative frame of mind to it. I like to use the word or use the phrase area of improvement instead. And so the way I look at that, and then the way I answer that question is like, here are the areas I need to improve on. Like I might not be the best at doing immediate action because I like to think a lot. So that sometimes slows down, you know, tasks that I might be doing. So just, you know, being mindful of timelines and just, you know, in future projects that I might have to do. So just looking at areas of improvement that everybody, like you said, nobody's perfect. Everyone has these areas of improvement that they need to do. And being self-aware, like you mentioned before, is super important to knowing those areas of improvement.
Do you think it's a good idea I think this is a textbook reference, but like they always tell you when you do give a weakness, always share what you're doing to try to improve. Have you heard that one before? I'm sure you've heard it before.
I've heard of that before, and I think that's a pretty good practice. I
don't think it's optimal nowadays, in my opinion. Like I think that's a little dated, where you know you have to say like, oh, but like say I'm a poor communicator, and oh, but I've been reading a lot. Like that. Yeah. That's kind of generic now. I feel like
it's a little bit counterintuitive towards the question, because if you've already, it depends on what you say about what you are working on. If it's like gradual, like small improvements towards something that you're still working on continuously, versus like, oh, like I used to be bad at organizing, but I'm good now because I took an organization class, and like I don't have that weakness anymore. So if you say it from that perspective, or it's like, oh, I'm a really bad organizer, but every single day I'm taking this class and I'm slowly improving, and like I'm still not good at organizing, but I'm getting better every day, and I'm trying my best and to put in the effort towards making those improvements, then it's a little bit more better of an answer, I would say.
100%. But I think that covers most of that question. That's a pretty, I don't know, the pretty generic question.
Very generic question. But yeah, I would say specifics, be authentic, be self-aware. I think those are the three big themes when you're answering that question. So, all right. So third question is, why did you leave your last job?
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I ask that all the time. I mean, every if you get an HR round, they're gonna ask you, because at the end of the day, the logic behind this question is for a recruiter to find out the motivation. That's what they're really looking for. Not motivation actually, but a factor why you're actually looking or on the market. The second that a recruiter has a chance to talk to you, that means you're open to something. And
Yeah.
I always phrase it as, hey, thanks for taking my call. I know you're looking for something. Like, what's missing? What's missing? Because usually there's something missing for them to leave or intend on leaving.
And a lot of the times, the reason why they left their last job is probably a very similar reason why they're willing to leave their current job. So it's a good indication of, like you mentioned, the motivators about, like, is it because of money? Is it because of your boss? Is it because of the challenges at your work? Like, whatever the case may be, the recruiters definitely want to know that answer, because they want to make sure that you're aligned with the company and the mission and the job itself, because, it might not be the case where they're going to be able to offer the highest paying job. So if you're only motivated by money, then it might not be the best fit for the both of you, right?
Yeah.
So then it's just finding alignment, I think, is the big part of asking that question.
Yeah. What are some bad ways of answering that question? I can think of one, but I want to hear if you've ever heard any bad ones.
Why did you leave your last job? Because you got fired. Performance related.
Well, let me take it back then. Like, do you think it's good to be honest in this one or no? Because like there's there's so many debates that like you could always use the generic description of saying that you got restructured or right sized, right? Like that's a very default safe answer if you don't want to disclose more than that.
Depends on the reason and depends on the specifics, I would say. If it was something that was... that's a tough one. I don't know. If someone actually got let go because of their performance and they just weren't doing a good job, do you tell prospective employers? I don't think so.
You probably don't.
I think you go generic on that, but it's very tough because then they just might be able to read in between the lines anyways about like your past.
Yeah, I would say if you if you don't have long tenures, be prepared to answer just for each company. And like recruiters and what people look for is just consistency too, right? If you keep saying, or inconsistencies versus consistencies, if you keep moving and every time the reasons for money, then we can kind of predict the trend of you wanting to move for money. I mean, I had one recently where I asked a person she was at a role, so I guess I was asking the kind of like why she's looking to make a move rather than why you left. But she was just, her answer was pretty kind of turned me off a bit, because what she was saying was she's just shopping around because she heard the market is hot.
Yeah,
just shopping around, and I think that's a bad answer. That's a terrible answer. If you're gonna say that, don't even take the call. I feel like you're just it's not gonna go anywhere. The interest isn't there, and you're relying on the recruiter to really sell you on the golden job or offer you a 50-60% raise. That was a terrible answer in my opinion. So
I would say that's a terrible answer too.
Give a genuine answer, but don't give an answer that's a little bit on the extreme side of you being like just solely for money. I think money is the one that irks recruiters a lot. In my opinion.
No, it's true.
Right? Like that's one factor. It can't be the sole factor unless sales roles.
If you're in sales, then I would say money being a factor is pretty important. But I think for most jobs, especially if you're looking to move to like a permanent position, that you want to be motivated by more than just money. Even statistically speaking, money is not the biggest motivator. It's maybe like
it's up there.
Third or fourth, but it's not number one. It's never been number one. And so if you indicate that, it just means that you might have some ulterior motives, or like even if you join, it might be temporary. You might join because it's a high salary, but you might not stick around. And then recruiters can tell when your intentions are not pure. And so I think it's a point to be able to answer that question. But to into it as genuine as possible. For some people it is the case where all they care about is money, and so.
But that's fair. But if they're honest, but then like, yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know. It just gives
it gives a bad taste in the
mouth
people's
for sure.
mouths, and just
it can't be the only factor is what I'm going to say. It can't be the only factor.
You would hope it's not the only factor.
You hope it's not the only factor.
Yeah, so that's all suggestions for that question. Okay, so speaking about money, so the next question is, what are your salary expectations?
Well, I think we chatted about this briefly, but I know in certain states, countries, wherever there may or may not be restrictions, so that question can or cannot come up. But about asking what your current salary is. Expectations, you're right.
Expectations you can ask.
This is
like, what are you looking for? How much are you looking for?
I've had people answer it in so many different ways. I've had people give me a range. I've had people just offer their numbers right now, and this is what. And those, I think, the ones that offer the current have genuine intentions to tell the recruiter, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I would need for it to work. However, I've also had people be so honest and tell me, or what I think is honest, and tell me that this is what I'm making, but I'm willing to take a pay cut to this number to join.
Interesting.
I've had that at the executive level, and I was like, wow. Like, but I've also had people like similar to those TikTok videos. Well, according to XYZ research, I believe my salary is this range, and it's fair. Like, that's a very fair way of saying it. But at the end of the day, like, it all depends on what your skills are and what they're looking for and how much value you can provide. Because if you're, let's say, a new grad, and you ask like, what are your salary expectations, and your buddies are all in iBanking making 150K, whatever it is, you can't really say that you want 150K off the top of, right off the bat. You just can't. So like, one thing I will say is that, like, just because someone is making that amount doesn't mean that you are entitled to that amount is what I'm going to say.
So for this one, from a perspective of an interviewee, I would always disclose how much you're looking for or what your salary expectations are. But make sure that it's backed up by some sort of research, I would say. Like you mentioned, I'm not going to just throw a random number in the air just because it's a hard number and I want it. It should be based off of extensive research, whether it's websites like levels.fyi or teamblind.com, or even part of it should be your current salary. Obviously, maybe not obvious, but most of the time when people want to leave their jobs for another one, they want a slight increase to what they're making now. So you combine, let's say, even a 10 to 15% increase from what you're making, combine that with the research, you can come up with some sort of range or number that you might be looking for. And you don't have to disclose how much you're looking for, how much you're making right now, as per some laws, of course. I always find it, if you have a really good relationship and you're pretty transparent with your recruiter and you disclose that information, they're not going to use it against you.
Yeah, if anything, it helps in the process.
It helps in the process. They won't use it against you.
Because at the end of the day, time is valuable for both parties, and at the end, the last thing a recruiter wants is for things to fall apart at the end and not having the alignment. To be frank, that's what I usually explain. It's
only when how much you're making right now and how much you're looking for is just like way like. You're making 100K, but you want to make 400K, like something like ridiculous like that. Then there's definitely going to be a lot of misalignment and like mistrust. It's like, why are you asking for so much compared to what you're making and what the research shows, right? So you just got to be fair in your assessment of what you're looking for, and then being transparent with what you are making right now will help get you to that fair expectations that you're looking for.
100%. I would also say, like, be careful not to overdo it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Don't overdo it.
I've had people overdo it, and I will admit, I think it backfired on them. And you don't realize it, but it can and will, because that leaves also a bitter taste in a recruiter's mouth. It's like, wow, what has changed from when you were asking 200K to all of a sudden, hey, I'll take it for 150. Like, You know, like it's.
And also sometimes you just don't get the job.
Yeah.
If you overestimate,
you rule yourself out.
You rule yourself out. It's like, oh, I want 200K. It's like, well, we can only offer 180K or whatever. Yeah. It's like, we're not even going to bother offering you because you're asking for too much. In reality, you were making 160 and you would have been super happy with 180K.
Yeah. So just proceed with caution.
Proceed with caution. Like I said, do a realistic assessment of, you know, what the market says plus your current value. Then, you know, everyone deserves a bit of an increase for, you know, whenever you move jobs, but just don't overdo it. Like you said, don't ask for too much because that'll put you into a lot of trouble, I would say.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
So that covers that one.
All right. Next question is, this one's an interesting one. Tell me an example of, which is like another very common question. And it could be just about anything. Like, tell me an example of when this happened, or tell me an example of, you know, when you had multiple priorities and how did you, you know, accomplish those tasks or whatever it is. Like, so how do you answer that type of questions when they're asking you for specific examples within your work history?
Usually, you gotta answer that question with a fairly detailed answer.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not a one-word question, by the way. No. So you don't just say, "Yep, it happened here." No, that's not the best way. I think the best way is answering the who, what, why. Was it the 5 W's? I think it's called.
Yeah.
So explaining what happened in the situation, who was involved, why it was important, and some sort of what recruiters want to hear is what was your role in that scenario or example, and what's the outcome? You have to include an outcome. If you don't include an outcome, like that's kind of the deal breaker for the question is how good your outcome is and what you've learned or what happened and how you navigate that situation, and just being detailed. I think some people just don't give enough details.
It's true. The acronym that I kind of grew up with was the STAR method.
Yes.
So situation, the task, the action, and the result. So just like you said, it's all about detail and making sure that you're describing the situation in as much detail as possible, what you actually did, and what were you supposed to do, what you actually did, and what was the outcome, like you mentioned. So I think those are some important factors whenever you're answering questions about examples, and that's why you really got to know your like.
You need to know examples in general.
Come prepared. Like every time I go into an interview, I always have a few examples in my back pocket that like I know that they're most likely going to ask. You know, and it's a lot of times it is going to be specific to your job. Like as a recruiter, like one of the questions, like, tell me an example of the hardest role that you ever worked on. It's like I have one in my back pocket that I always can bring out at any moment that I know all the details for. It's when you don't have any of those examples prepared and you get caught off guard and you blank out, then that's tough.
Yeah,
and you might have blown your interview.
Yeah, it's hard to bounce back. One, I think, common mistake that I notice people do in this question is also going on a tangent and providing too many examples and then just keeping like using one example as a domino to like set up another example to set up another one.
Yeah.
That's a common mistake I've noticed. And good answers are usually they're detailed, but they're also concise and to the point. You know, don't steer too far away from the question.
Yep.
That's a
good tip for that is when you are giving your answer to this type of question or any other type of question, you can ask them, would you like some more detail about this? Or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, that's
and
a very safe question.
If they want more detail, and they're just like, please tell me a little bit more about this and that, and then you can give that more detail. But if not, they're like, all right, let's move on to the next question.
The interviewer actually might even add, like, this also helps to kickstart other questions as well. There's a purpose behind this question from a recruiter perspective.
Yeah.
I usually like to ask and then segue into like different parts and poke holes at the story. So if you're giving examples and also telling a story or for this example, be prepared for follow-up questions for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
It's rare to just end at one example. It's like, what happened here? What if this happened? Be prepared for multiple scenarios.
Right. They might throw you some hypotheticals, within that situation. So yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's and it's part of just like sometimes having a conversation, right? There's going to be definitely some back and forth, and you got to be prepared for it. And but yeah, you got to be mindful of your time, the interviewer's time, and just make sure that you're not going too long over things. And it's totally fine to just ask, like, hey, am I speaking too much about this, or or do you want more detail, or am I speaking like not enough? Like, it's okay to kind of being able to ask those questions during the interview. So next question is, what do you know about the role/company?
This is pretty important in general. Like, you can even cover this and tell me about yourself. I think at the end of it, like, what your current state is, and then segue into what you're looking for, and how you even came about finding the opportunity, or what you liked about the job. That's what I've seen a lot of people do, and I think it works really well and smooth if recruiters start off with, tell me about yourself. But it goes back to like just recruiting or interviewing 101. Do your research.
Do your research.
If you don't, I've had so many people just think that what we do in my company is completely something else, and it's a big, that's a hard misstep. It's like meeting your in-laws and then getting their name wrong. After they told you 50 times what their name is, it's pretty bad.
It's been a few times when people I interviewed
wrong company
said Spotify instead of Shopify.
Yeah,
and I was like,
yep.
I think you're thinking about a completely different company. So it's a huge misfire and a bit of a red flag when you haven't done your research, or you completely like miss the point of the question, or like because we want to know that you want to join the company.
Yes.
Or you're at least interested.
Yeah. Because it all starts with research. If you're interested in something, you would at least do a quick Google search or ask someone. Equally important, I would say, do you research on the interviewer?
Yeah, on the interviewer, do you research on the job, making sure you read the job description, what they do, other people in the job, at the company. Like, there's so much you can do to help prepare yourself, and not many people do enough. I would say do enough research.
Yeah, I think it's just surface level stuff.
All of it's like a quick Wikipedia search.
One-liner. Oh, I heard you guys do this. It's like, well, that's nice, I guess.
Yeah, that's technically true.
That's true.
But like, what else? What else do you know?
I've seen people, the ones that are genuinely interested, they will
extensive.
They give, like, they look at the news, they bring up articles, blogs. I like this person, I follow this person. It's like, wow, they do the research, and it does impress recruiters, in my opinion.
Oh, that's what I did when I interviewed at Shopify. I had like 5 articles. I found out exactly how many people who are recruiters at Shopify. I put down the job description, the interviewers' details, where they went to high school, like everything. Just like made sure that I knew everything about it, just because of how interested and engaged I was in the organization. So, and it showed, right? It shows when you know your stuff. Like,
authenticity comes through.
Yes.
If you've done the research, the authenticity, we can sense it. So.
Yes, exactly.
So yeah, do your research.
Do your research. Yeah. Next question is a little bit similar to the one that we asked before, but it was tell me about X experience on your resume. But this might be a little bit more like technical in nature.
Usually, it is a technical, or just being prepared to answer questions on your resume. So this is usually to weed out people that are just not honest. Usually, I feel like, right? Yeah. It's very easy to write everything and anything on the resume. Yeah. Right. And just kind of goes back to doing research. Make sure you know research about yourself. What you wrote on the resume.
Well, I think it's an important distinction is that what you put on a resume is usually the what, but not usually the how. It's like, oh, you did this, but like, how did you do that? And then if you aren't able to explain how you did something, Did you really do it then? Did you really do it? Were you the one that did it, right?
Yeah, so, like an easy example that I've noticed, and like time after time, it's automation QA engineers. Right. They do test automation, and then they write the word Java, and then you ask them which IDE did you use, and they can't answer it, and it's like, well, you use Java, so you have to use Java with an IDE, right?
Yes.
So
yeah. So yeah, a lot of times, not only automation QAs, but people in general in tech sometimes put things on the resume that they might not have experience with. And then I've had a lot of times where it's like, oh, like you put this on your resume, like what do you like? When did you use this technology? It's like, oh no, I've never used it. I watched a YouTube video once about it. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. Cool.
That's not experience.
Yeah, so just be prepared, right? Just be prepared that if you're gonna write it, it's fair game for them to ask you about it.
If you're gonna put on your resume, there's a fair assumption that you're gonna be like asked a lot of questions about it, and if you don't have the experience to back it up, then you're probably not gonna get the job.
I mean, knowledge is good though. I will say, if you have knowledge of stuff, that's good. But like, it's not.
Depends on the job description.
Depends how you write it. Depends how you write it on the resume. Like,
yes, that's true.
It's better to like.
But it's a red flag if you don't indicate your level of proficiency in the technology and it's required in the job.
100%. Like it's gonna be a tough interview in general. If you did it for the sake of getting the interview and that's a key skill, like sometimes I've seen it where candidates think it's one thing and then realistically the recruiter actually was looking for something very specific in the resume and then they're like, oh, I don't have that actually. It's like,
yes,
oh, okay.
So that's why it's important to, if you are going to put something, at least put the proficiency or an example of what you did with that technology, and then be able to back it up.
Yep.
That's
pretty much it. Back it up. Just back it up.
Yeah. Okay, so last question is, which is usually the end of the interviews, is do you have any questions for us?
What do you usually hear? What's the best way of going about it, James?
Yeah, I like it when people have questions. I think it indicates the level of interest and how invested they are in the process of interviewing in the job. I like the questions where they want to know what makes a successful person in the role. It's like what sort of attributes or qualities do you look for that are usually successful in the role, or like what sort of things does this person need to do in order to be successful? Just kind of indicators of success of like what they need to do, because then it shows that like not only do they want the job, they want to be good at it. And it just really like it goes a long way. Like, you know what, this person I think would do these things, would do a good job if given the opportunity. And so that's why I like those type of questions more often than the more general questions that people have. Like, oh, like,
why did you join this company?
Why did you join this company?
I like those.
I like those too, but like, or questions about like, oh, what does the company do? Or like, those like questions that you should already know. It's like, oh, so what's the mission of the company? Or like this and that, right? Or questions that are in the job description. It's like, oh, so like, how many years of experience does this job need? Or like, what technologies does this job use? It's like, and it's all in the job description. So like those type of questions that you should already know the answer to. I don't like those questions.
I like the forward thinking questions about like, if I get this role, like what's the 30, 60, 90 day plan?
I like that too. The 30, 60, 90. Yep.
That's a good one. Like it just means that they're interested in kind of seeing what the expectations are and getting that alignment. What are the challenges that someone can expect? And like,
I love that question.
I love those questions because I think that really goes to show that they're already thinking about what, what's the day-to-day going to look like, right? And what they can encounter being in the actual role.
I like that that I guess frame that you mentioned, like any forward-thinking questions. Yeah. Any questions
those are good ones.
Any questions that deal with them being in the job and like what they have to do or what they need to do to be successful. Like, I love that. I love those questions.
Those are good. Definitely very good. But at the same time, like if you have tough questions, I would say ask them. I would ask them. I mean, it's an opportunity they offer.
Oh, you can ask even really hard hitting questions like, oh, like I've seen that there's been a bunch of layoffs at your company in the last month.
What's the outlook?
Why is that? Is it going to be more layoffs? And just like asking those tough questions also shows how much you care.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, keep in mind, this is an opportunity for you as a person being interviewed to like equally ask the company interview them. Sorry,
Yes.
that's what I meant to say. Like, it's an opportunity for you to interview them
Yes.
too. At the end of the day, an interview it takes two to tango, right? It has to work
course.
for both parties, and this is the opportunity for you to do the interviewing.
And you have to align expectations. I think that's the biggest things, because if both you and the company, like if you join the company and there's stuff that you didn't know about or you were misaligned with, like that was an opportunity for you in the interview to be able to align those expectations and then make sure that you knew what you were getting yourself into. The good, bad, and the ugly.
Do you think asking a salary, like if the interviewer or the company doesn't tell you, do you think that's appropriate at this stage, a later stage? What are your thoughts in general? Because some people will say, "Oh, I didn't think it was appropriate, so I'm going to ask."
For asking the salary, like
like that's a very what are the expectations for this role? Like that's I've gone asked that a couple times.
Yeah,
you know?
I've gotten asked the questions. I think it's fine.
I think it's
like,
a good question. I think
it's a good question. You can always ask it at any time. I prefer it like maybe in the second stage or like the middle stages of the interviews, just so there's a little bit more commitment from both sides. But I think it's fair to ask at any point about salary.
Yeah. One thing I would always ask, for the sake of your sanity as a job seeker, what are the next steps and when can you expect to hear back? Those timelines. It's very, although like recruiters, I mean, for a good candidate experience, I believe a good recruiter will also share that regardless.
Yep.
But at the same time, that's a question I would ask regardless.
It's true. You know, it's true. Sometimes people don't lay out the next steps or timelines, and then you're left just wondering, okay, am I going to hear back in 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
And you don't want that. So I think great way to really end the interview is with that question.
I agree.
You know, what are the next steps and what are the timelines? So you know when to follow up too, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't want to bombard them with an email tomorrow when interviews are still happening for next week and then the week after. So I think just getting aligned to timelines, that's a great way to
I think that's a really good way to end things. Yeah.
Cool. So,
and an interview and a podcast.
Yeah, that's a great way to end it, right, James? Like timeline wise, we're done.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And if anyone has any questions or common questions that they want us to kind of discuss, feel free to drop us an email, leave a comment, and see you on the next one.
All right. Sounds good.